Okay, welcome back to the Presidential Candidate Forum on Entrepreneurship. I know we're running a bit longer in time, which is good because our next guest had some flight delays outside of his control. And so but appreciate those of you that are watching and appreciate your interest and attention in this issue. So I am pleased to introduce our fourth and final guest today, Governor Asa Hutchinson. Asa Hutchinson was governor of Arkansas from 2015 to January of 2023. He's had a long history in public service and leadership. He was previously the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Arkansas, appointed by President Reagan. He was a congressman for the 3rd District of Arkansas, representing Northwest Arkansas. He's had 2 roles in the George W. Bush administration, first as head of the Drug Enforcement Administration, later as Undersecretary of the Department of Homeland Security. And not a lot of people know this, and we're excited to talk about this, Governor Hutchinson has been an entrepreneur. He founded a consulting firm. He's also started the very first FM radio station in Bentonville, Arkansas, and he's got some great stories about that we can hope he can share. He's a graduate of Bob Jones University and the University of Arkansas School of Law. Please join me in welcoming Governor Asa Hutchinson.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you, Governor.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleased to
All right.
seat.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us. And your background in entrepreneurship is sort of a unique aspect that not a lot of people know about. And so we'd love to hear about some of your stories of entrepreneurship, your own experience in entrepreneurship, and also what got in the way of you doing it and how, as president, you might make it easier for others to follow your path as an entrepreneur.
Well, thank you. It is great to be with you, and anything that we can do to promote entrepreneurship in the United States, both in terms of our culture, but also improving policy, I'm all for and hope that we can do that. And, you know, whenever I was a young lawyer, you know, I got into the radio business. And that was actually a time when the FCC had more regulation of radio stations and had a lot of different requirements in order to get a license. But we were startup from the beginning. I actually got the license from the FCC, had to go through a contested hearing with them. But then once you get the license, then you have to go into business. And that's where I built the tower for the radio station, you know, got all the equipment, put it in place, and we were broadcasting out of a double-wide mobile home.
And you personally had to climb up the tower to put up the wires or something
I did.
like that.
It was actually, it worked out perfect because the right location for the tower happened to be a rabbit farm that my wife and I were living on. And so we left the rabbit farm so they could have the studio, but it was a great location. And so yes, I climbed the trees actually to help get the lines up to hold the tower. And so it's just a typical startup where you're investing your sweat equity, but your capital in it. And it's, you know, you do it because, and it was a for-profit station, you wanted to make some money on it, but you had your capital at risk and you didn't know what the outcome was going to be.
And so what were all the challenges as a young business person doing that, and how would you break down those barriers for others trying to do that?
Well, I mean, those were federal regulations that have actually been eased, and because, you know, now you don't have quite as many regulatory and requirements, and so that has been improved. But it certainly taught me a couple of things. One, that, you know, the regulatory environment adds to the cost, but also it, you know, adds to the length of the time before you can turn a profit. Because of all the contested nature of it, the licensure process, it took us a while to get on the air. And so you learn that, and then you also learn how to manage a business. I mean, there's always mistakes that are made, which just illustrates you got capital at risk. And we should always remember that entrepreneurs are putting themselves at risk. And risk deserves reward because you can fail and you don't get a reward. And so if you are successful, you know, we ought to be able to understand the importance of that. I also recognize, which is relevant today, the importance of accelerated depreciation in startup companies. Whenever you invest and buy the equipment, the early write-offs of the depreciation cost helps you to pay for the investment, and that's important for entrepreneurs today.
One of the questions we got from the audience was around disadvantaged entrepreneurs, people who might not have access to the same capital networks or might not have access to the same knowledge or education resources or social networks to be able to build a business in the same way. And I know as governor, you were involved in a number of different efforts to support entrepreneurship across the state. How do you think about supporting people who might not have the same chance to start and grow a business, and how do you go about helping them?
Well, you go about helping them by breaking down barriers and also making sure that they have access to the same information those in the club have access to. And I'm speaking of whether it would be a government contract or a grant program. You've got to really market those to minorities, disadvantaged, or others that might not have the same access to information. That's very, very important. A couple things that as governor of Arkansas, and I just finished 8 years, it was a terrific time as governor of our state, and I had a simple premise as governor that we ought to grow the private sector of the economy more than the government sector. And so that's key to everything that we were doing. And so we broke down barriers by lowering the tax rate. It was a 7% individual income tax rate in Arkansas, and we lowered that to 4.9%. That gives people more capital for their own investments, control over their own money for their own families. Secondly, we reduced licensure burdens. You know, I created a task force, in essence, that would look at licensure requirements and where can we reduce that burden. We certainly did it for our military spouses so that, you know, as they come in with their military partner, that if they have a license, a professional license, that they can have reciprocal relationships so they can immediately start to work with that license that they had from another state. So that's one of the barriers that you break down. But I told my regulatory agencies that businesses, when they start up or they are expanding or they're working on an area that we regulate, that consider them a partner with us and not an adversary. And that's really important in the regulatory environment because it's not just about reducing regulations, it's also about a common sense approach to regulatory enforcement as well. And obviously, if business crosses the line and they are all of a sudden breaking the regulations, you know, then they become an adversary, but give them the benefit of the doubt. And that simple message to my regulators really made a difference in how businesses operated and how they worked through some of the challenges that they faced.
You've actually answered so many of the questions I had. This is wonderful. But Bill, I was reading how, you know, building your career in Bentonville, you've also met some incredible entrepreneurs as well, like Sam Walton. How has that framed your appreciation for the benefits and challenges of entrepreneurship that have also become very scalable? Because if you're elected president, you're going to be trying to cater to the needs of the small entrepreneur and to the Sam Waltons.
Well, I'm glad you raised this because I'm very proud of the historic entrepreneurs in Arkansas. The spirit is deep in the hills of our state. And I actually started practicing law on the square of Bentonville when Sam Walton was building his, his, not empire, but he was building his stores and growing as a national entity. And to watch him in his common approach and his consumer and customer-oriented approach really taught me a lot about how we should operate in government as well. And so it's the customer first. Well, that's a good business principle that Sam Walton had. There's an application there in government as well. And so I saw that in Sam Walton, the customer first, obviously really breaking down so that the costs are lower for the consumer. And then how he scaled everything and understood the importance of technology in logistics and the delivery and how that could save dollars as well. But then Sam Walton, but then there was Don Tyson, who started Tyson's Foods, and J.B. Hunt, who started J.B. Hunt Trucking. All three of those were in Northwest Arkansas as I was a young professional. But even in the poultry industry, my dad, he saw it from a different perspective. He was USDA poultry inspector working for Tyson's that later became a global food provider. So those entrepreneurs were extraordinary. And people make excuses why you can't do certain things. And one of the excuses, of course, is that you don't have access to a 4-lane highway. But those 3 entrepreneurs built their empires and their businesses when you only had a 2-lane road getting there. You had no 4-lane highway, it was through the hills, and it was extraordinarily difficult in logistics, but there was no excuses, they still got it done.
Building on, it sounds like through the COVID pandemic, you really were dealing with a lot of supply chain issues. You know, in your role, almost like an entrepreneur or someone running a company. How would that translate to how you would run as president in terms of realizing just how hard it is if you're an entrepreneur to deal with supply chain in the world we live in?
Well, as president, first of all, I would try to move the critical supply chain away from China. Now, when I say critical supply chain, I'm speaking of the pharmaceuticals, I'm thinking of military component parts that we need, those sensitive industries that we should not be dependent upon somebody else, but that we should have the capacity to manufacture in the United States.
I'm just going to interrupt you for a moment, because having listened to you on podcasts, can you explain more to what extent that's actually based on your experience and your direct experience with China? Because there's a lot of discussion of China, but as an entrepreneurial audience, have you traveled to China? How does that compare to other countries you've worked with?
Well, I have. I've been to China at least 5 times.
Okay.
I went there as governor a number of times, and it was actually at a time when it was in the Obama administration, and China was like the new market, and that we were trying to bring some of the manufacturing back to the United States. And so we went there trying to develop return of manufacturing here for industries that were in China. And of course, subsequently got into a trade war, our relationships diminished, and so much of that fell apart. But that took me there, and I was also there in the private sector. And the challenge is that I'm negotiating a deal. I'm in the private sector. I'm representing a company, and I've got a Chinese counterpart company with us, and we're trying to resolve some complicated issues. And right in the middle of it, they say, we got to call a break. And I said, well, what do you need to do? We got to call Beijing. So they had to go out and get approval from the Central Committee of the Communist Party for the negotiation they were doing. And it just illustrated that they are statist, they are controlled, and that it's not a true free market by any means. And so that painted a picture for me, realizing that there's a lot of obstacles for Chinese competition with us. I believe we'll continue to be the #1 economic power in the world because we have a better rule of law in this country. We have a better system of business redress, and we're free market. Where the government doesn't tell us, but we're allowing the entrepreneurs to make decisions on those businesses. And so that's just some of the experience that I had with China. But during the pandemic, of course, is where we really had the challenge, because we had to have PPE, personal protective equipment. I bet you thought you would hopefully never have to hear those words again. But we were out of it. We needed it for our medical care. And so every state's on their own trying to get that. And of course, it was manufactured in China. So I'm governor, and I'm calling over there to China, or working through our intermediaries, reserving factory time in China to manufacture PPE for Arkansas. And we got it reserved, it's all going well, and all of a sudden they call up and say, you've been bumped, New York's outbid you, and so you don't have the time. And I said, we've got to do better than this. And obviously that's one of the reasons that we've got to prioritize that manufacturing here in the United States.
And are there other countries that you would kind of nurture relationships and try to pivot entrepreneurs to move to?
The answer is yes. And of course, it's there decisions as to where they go.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, I supported the CHIPS Act, which was an incentive for chips manufacturers to return to the United States. And so there is a level of incentives that can be provided, but we, as a government, we need to limit those. So they're primarily business decisions that are made, but you know, the president has a good bully pulpit, and we can advocate, and I would encourage them to return in those sensitive industries to more friendly territories, and either to the United States. Obviously, India is a possibility, but Mexico is. And Mexico is important because we already have a great interchange with them, and they're in our supply chain. But I want to be able to use that for some economic pressure on Mexico, saying, hey, we're going to help return industry to North America, but you got to be a better partner with us. You've got to be able to go after the cartels. You've got to be able to enforce the rule of law in your country. You have to have a supply chain that is reliable. And so we want to use that as a tool, economic growth, but hey, you've got to do better in Mexico in cooperation with us.
Thank you.
I want to follow on that theme of national competitiveness, because it's sort of the buzz now, but then you hardly hear entrepreneurship talked about as in the frame of national competitiveness, but you just did. You actually said the ability of our entrepreneurs to pivot and adapt is actually an advantage within the system. Can you talk a bit about how entrepreneurship plays into national competitiveness like that?
Well, it does, but let me take one slice of that, which is very, very important, and that is computer science education, or STEM education. And if we're going to compete with China, but also compete with India and our competitors across the globe, we need to have computer science education in the United States that allows, one, that creates that culture of entrepreneurship. There's not anybody that's better at entrepreneurship than somebody that's developing software for the future or a new technology. And so we illustrated that in Arkansas. When I became governor, we had 1,100 students statewide taking computer science, 1,100. When I left, we had 23,000 taking computer science, because we were the first state to require it to be offered in every high school, and we retrained our teachers. We went from 20 teachers to 650 teachers that were certified to teach computer science. I want to take that model nationally, and not by heavy-handed mandates, but by incentives and by grants. Hey, we're going to encourage every high school in America to offer computer science so that we can compete. And you combine, you know, the learning of coding and the different aspects of technology, and then you combine that with the startup companies and the startup culture, then we're in a position to compete. And that's what we've got to do. Right now, we're on the leading edge of new technologies. We want to stay that way, and we got three choices. You either import the talent, you create the talent, or you lose the business. The only option I like is to create that talent right here in the United States.
It sounds like what you're saying is we may have some of the great research happening here, but the knowledge of how to and how to build and how to use that technology hasn't really filtered down to the level of ordinary people who can apply it to build new things.
That's right. I mean, we have great research institutions, and we've been on the cutting edge of AI, on blockchain, but to make sure that we can meet the needs of those growing technology businesses, and many of them are just startups, we've got to have a talent pool. And right now, you know, it's centered East and West Coast. We need that growth, as Steve Case points out, in Middle America. The rise of the rest, and that's what we're doing in Arkansas. And so we combine increased technology education with investing in accelerator programs. And so we put $2 million every couple of years.
Like startup accelerators.
Startup accelerators. We bring talent across the globe, and financial services was the first partner that we had, FIS, and they came in, they brought startup companies in, and we mentored them, we put money there, we gave them access to capital, and our hope was to be able to land some of those companies in Arkansas. And we wound up having 4 different accelerator programs, and it's been a continuing investment. that's really paying off for the state and growing those startup companies and that culture of starting those technology companies.
You've made entrepreneurship one of these priorities when you were governor, and it's always struck me, if you look across the industrialized economies, almost all of them have made entrepreneurship and innovation part of their competitiveness strategy and their national security strategy. But within the US, that conversation hasn't always happened. But at the state level, some states do it and other states don't. Why do you think some states see that and other states don't, and what are the lessons for the country about that?
Well, I think the lesson is that leadership makes a difference, and that states that are more open to business and have business-friendly environments attract industry in large and the entrepreneurial spirit as well. And so that culture is critically important. And I mentioned some of the large businesses that we have, from Dillard's to Tyson's to Murphy USA. They all started as small businesses and startup companies. But what is it, 70% of the growth is coming from startup companies and entrepreneurship. So never forget the small startup companies, how important they are. And if I may go back to one thing that was important during the pandemic that I was responsible for as governor. Tough decisions had to be made about businesses and who could operate safely and who could not operate safely. And there was enormous national pressure to say, you're an essential business, so you get to stay open. You're a non-essential business, so you've got to close down. And I thought that through. There's enormous national pressure there. And I said, no, every business that provides a job for a family is an essential business. So I didn't make that distinction. And we didn't shut down those businesses. We all, and in hindsight, maybe we should have done something different, but restaurants and others had restrictions that could only do carryout. And this really harmed our small business environment, and we had to make up for it with, some grants and PPP loans to keep them alive. But by and large, we kept those businesses open in Arkansas, and it really, really made a difference.
So you're an entrepreneur, you have really nurtured businesses in Arkansas, but if you're elected president, day one, you're gonna have every big company showing up on your doorstep, placing pressures on your administration. How are you gonna still be able to remember and make time for those smaller businesses and entrepreneurs that fuel the economy when there is so much money and power concentrated with big businesses? And this is a question that actually came from our Inc. 5,000 members. They said the vast majority of jobs are created by small and mid-sized businesses, but our narrative focuses on big businesses with 1% of GDP. What will the presidential candidates do to help my business?
Well, it's a great question. It's a very good question because I've been governor and big business has lobbyists and they're knocking on your door, and I'm sure it's multiplied even more as president and at the national level, and I was in Congress, and so you obviously have those businesses and their interest, and you don't disregard them because they have good cases to make. But thank goodness for the National Federation of Independent Businesses. Thank goodness for the National Restaurant Association, that you actually have lobbyists that represent small businesses as well, and the mom and pop businesses. But it's also just a matter of your background. For example, I grew up on the farm. I think it's helpful to have an agricultural background to understand ag and what it means to our economy. In the same way, it's helpful to have a startup mentality in business as president, because you never forget what it was like, and you never forget that aspect of policy. And so it can be done, and tax policy is where you start. And right now we have a $32 trillion debt, which, I question any candidate that says we're going to lower taxes, because we've got a huge debt problem right now. So the key thing to me is that you have a pro-growth tax policy. And so the accelerated depreciation, for example, that's something that I want to be able to continue, because that helps our small entrepreneurs. It helps them with the investment capital. as well as other businesses.
What about, there's a lot of talk during this campaign about, season about kind of cutting agencies. Specifically for our audience, what threats should we consider for the SBA, for any divisions within Department of Commerce that nurture and cultivate entrepreneurs? What would we expect from your administration?
Well, first of all, what you can expect is a reduction of the administrative state. I want to be able to reduce the regulatory burden on businesses. And it could be from the waters of the U.S. That the EPA pushed out. The United States Supreme Court struck down those expansive federal regulations. That was not the intent of Congress. And so I would want to be able to tighten the review process of administrative rules that burden business to make sure that we're not going beyond the intent of Congress and that we're evaluating how does this impact businesses. You know, in Arkansas, and of course it's a smaller environment, but I had all of our agencies submit proposed regulations to the governor's office. My staff reviewed them, and those are the questions they asked. Is this going to increase costs to the consumers, but also to the business owner? You know, is it necessary? And so we want to be able to approach it that way. But secondly, I've set a plan to reduce non-defense federal workforce by 10%. And so you ask about the SBA, a very important mission that helps small business, but we're going to have to look at ways to do it more efficiently, to utilize technology, and to be able to streamline that workforce. Whenever you're looking at the regulatory state, we've grown dramatically, so I just simply set a goal of reducing it by 10%. And in Arkansas, I did that. We reduced state employment by 14% while I was governor. That's 3,000 fewer state workers. We didn't fire anybody. We just said, if you leave, if you retire, we're going to evaluate it as to whether that's a job that needs to continue or there's a better way to do it. So that's the same approach that I would take at the federal level. So tighten the regulatory environment, be more restrictive on that. Secondly, let's try to do things more efficiently, lower the cost, reduce the workforce at the federal level, and then have a pro-growth tax policy.
So to be clear, you would retain agencies like the SBA, but you wouldn't replace jobs that people left, or you would kind of...
We evaluate them. In other words, I put in a hiring freeze, but it's a flexible hiring freeze, and obviously the Border Patrol will need more resources. So we're going to make sure that happens. SBA needs to fulfill their core functions, but I think there's ways that you can tighten up their mission. And it might not, I mean, the SBA might have everybody there that's got a job that's justified, but there might be areas in the Department of Education, for example, that we can reduce that administrative state. There's a lot of candidates that talk about, well, we want to eliminate the Department of Education, we want to eliminate the IRS, we want to eliminate the Department of Commerce. You know, I transformed state government in Arkansas from 42 different departments down to 15 for management purposes. So at the federal level, you know, I've got 15 major cabinet positions. So that's not the problem. The problem is how it's managed. And so I'm more about reducing the bureaucratic overhead versus just shuffling the deck on agencies.
Sort of a last question just around the American dream, and this is sort of a theme that seems to pop up a lot across America these days, which is it feels tarnished to a lot of people. But entrepreneurs are optimists by their very nature, and so it's sort of the last question of the forum. Is the American dream in trouble, or is there something we can do about it in terms of entrepreneurs and expanding the opportunity for people like that?
I don't think the American dream is in danger, but it's questioned by some people. They wonder whether they still have access to the American dream. But if you look at the stories of entrepreneurs that are very current, I mean, if you're on the campaign trail, you see them every day, of someone taking a risk and becoming a success story, and someone that was an immigrant to our country. And I talked to someone the other day that they came in with $300. They rented a motel room for 4 days. They got a job in a mall, and they said, I got to do better than this. And they started taking classes in college. They got a degree, and all of a sudden they're managing portfolios, and they had some breaks, and they got a great, they fulfilled the American dream. But they started with $300. That's repeated every day. So it is absolutely alive and well. What government policy must do is to reward risk-taking, to reward those that work hard and have initiative, and not to put out so much money as we did during the latter parts of the pandemic that discouraged work, that discouraged people from getting up and working hard and pursuing the American dream. We got to do better in our training our workforce so that they have a bigger vision of what they can become. And those are things that are important for the American dream. I believe it is alive and well, and everybody has a different version of that American dream. There's the Sam Walton version of the American dream, but there's also my version of the American dream, that I worked hard cleaning out chicken houses on a farm, and I wind up being in the Situation Room with the President of the United States, dealing with the latest terrorist threats to our country, important issues that we face. That's an American dream for me, but we all have our version of it, and I believe it is alive and well.
Governor Hutchinson, thank you so much for being here with us today, and thank you to the audience for being part of this presidential candidate forum. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you. Such a pleasure. Thank you.
And so finally, thank you. Let me give some final thoughts here. To all of you for being here, whether in person or online, extremely grateful to you for being part of this first ever time anyone's ever tried this. But as you can see, these issues really speak and resonate to so many people. And so we're grateful for your interest. We're grateful to the candidates that were all here today, and grateful to all the partners that made this possible. Thank you so much from Right to Start, and we look forward to continuing to engage you. We encourage everybody to go to the Right to Start's website, righttostart.org. There's a Take Action button you can hit at the very top of the site, and you can learn how to get involved with our work. Thank you very much. Have a good day.